Okay, this is Dr. Gary Villereal recording this record for the Veterans History Project, Western Kentucky University, on Tuesday, November 26, 2003, at Western Kentucky University and the Library Partnership for the Veteran History Project. This interview will be with
John E. Wood.
Okay, and when were you born?
November the 20th, 1920.
And what branch of service did you serve in?
United States Marine Corps.
And you served in which war?
It was at Pearl Harbor in November the 7th, 1941. December the 7th, 1941. And Battle of Midway, June the 4th, 1942.
Okay, now where were you born at? Where were you born?
Born at Ether, North Carolina.
And how many brothers and sisters did you have?
I had two brothers.
Older or younger?
Younger. Both younger.
And where did you go to school at when you were growing up?
At Sanford, North Carolina.
And did you go to what high school did you go to?
Sanford High School.
Sanford High School?
Yeah.
And did you do anything at high school? Like, were you into sports or anything like that? Or what did you study?
Well, I played baseball for 2 years.
Uh-huh.
That was the only sport that I played in.
And what position did you play?
Center field.
Uh-huh. And were you a pretty good batter or not?
Well, I was average, I guess.
And what did you do after high school?
Well, the first thing I did was I joined the Civilian Conservation Corps, and I spent 2 years in it. I was at 3 different camps. The first one was in Gaffney, South Carolina. The second one was Maryland, Oregon. I spent a year on the West Coast at it was Camp Klamath was the name of the camp, and then the last one was at Lenoir, North Carolina.
And then,
and after that, I worked for about 6 months at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and after the work was completed there, I joined the Marine Corps. And
why did you decide to join the Marine Corps?
well, I had a brother that had joined about a year before I did,
Mm-hmm.
and my father was in the Marine Corps, actually in World War One, and I just decided to join the Marine Corps too.
Mm-hmm. And how was it in basic or boot camp?
At the completion of boot camp.
How was it in boot camp? When you first went in, how was it?
Paris Island, South Carolina is where I went through boot camp. And after that...
What kind of experience was it?
The boot camp?
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't a picnic, but, it's something you don't forget about it, about going through boot camp. And you feel better, you feel pretty good about yourself after you get through, too.
Yeah. Did you ever think you wouldn't make it?
No, I didn't actually think I wouldn't make it. I didn't have too much trouble going through.
Mm-hmm.
I was glad it was over, though.
Yeah. Do you remember your drill instructors by chance?
The main one was Sergeant can't think of his name
No?
right now. But the second one was he was a sergeant coach, K-O-C-H, I think. And the other one was Corporal Marino. I think he had been in 14 years. He had gray hair. He was the oldest one of them.
Yeah.
And he was one of the old Shanghai Marines too,
Uh-huh.
China Marines.
Hmm.
I can't think of the first one's name, but he was the chief DI.
Hmm.
I can't think of it.
Well, maybe it'll come back to
Maybe
you.
it'll come back to
Yeah.
me.
And what was it like in when you graduated? Did they have a ceremony or anything?
No, at that time we didn't have any ceremony like they have now.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't anything like it is now.
And what did you do after boot camp?
I was sent to Quantico, Virginia, went through the field radio operator school. And then after that, I was sent down to Guantanamo Bay and joined the 4th Defense Battalion. And I was down there for, I guess, only about a month and a half, and the whole battalion was transferred to the West Coast. We went down through the Panama Canal and up the West Coast to San Diego, and we didn't stay there too long, but we left San Diego and went up to San Francisco, and I don't know how long we spent up there, but it seemed like it was several weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But then we changed ships, got off of the ship that we'd come from Guantanamo on, and that ship was the Shelmont. And then we got on the Henderson, and both of those were old World War I transports. We went back down to San Diego, and then we picked up a bunch of Marines out of boot camp, and a lot of sailors, Navy passengers, civilian contractors, and when we left San Diego on, I think it was on November the 20th. It's on my birthday, actually. And we were 9 days going across to Pearl Harbor. We got to Pearl Harbor on December the 1st. We docked on Monday morning, December the 1st, and we'd only been there a week when the Japs attacked Pearl Harbor. And then I spent about 2 more weeks, and part of the 4th Defense left on about a week after the attack, and they started to Wake Island.
Well, what happened out? So you get there on December 1st, and then you're there a week, and then on December 7th, a Japanese bomb.
I'd been there a week. They bombed it.
And okay, and what were you doing when that happened?
Well, actually, I had just come from breakfast that morning, and I was in my tent. We were living in tents while we were there, and some of the boys were coming back from the mess tent. We were, at the time, after I'd already come back, and they were talking about some of the airplanes bombing, an anti-aircraft fire up around them, and some of them were wondering why we're having maneuvers on Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
And I went out too, between the tent rows, and and we could see some planes flying down the coast. Seemed like they're following the coast down from Honolulu, and we see them diving. And there would be one or two coming down, one following another, and I saw anti-aircraft fire. You could see the burst of the anti-aircraft fire around them, and then pretty soon one of them just burst into a ball of fire, and I thought then that's too real to be maneuvers.
Mm-hmm.
And then a little later on, they passed the word up to us from Pearl Harbor, and it said that the island, the bay, the Pearl Harbor Navy Yard and the Hickam Field were under aerial attack by Japanese carrier-based planes, and then that was then when we knew for sure that it was the real thing, and no bombs were dropped around us, but we went down to our storage tents, and when we left Guantanamo Bay, we crated up our rifles, and we didn't even have them uncrated when the attack started. But they broke open the crates and threw everybody a rifle without regard to whether it was yours or not, and gave us a bandolier of ammunition and told us to fire on anything that was in range. And the only plane that really came close enough was just one plane. He flew around, circled around our camp, and flew on off in the direction of Honolulu. I don't know what the plane was doing, but unless maybe it's taking pictures, because he didn't seem to be in any hurry about what his business was. And some of the boys started firing at him with a rifle, but he was too far out of range to be any of them to hit him. They hit the plane, and they did get one 50 caliber machine gun set up down at the end of one of the tent rows, but and it fired on the plane too. But I don't think anybody hit any of the machine gun or the rifles. Either one did any damage to the plane, because it flew on off, and that was that's the closest one came to us. And then sometime there, after I guess it was that second wave of planes that the Japs, when they came back for the second attack, some of the guns, I don't know where they were coming from, actually began to fire at the anti-aircraft guns. Ours started firing out, and I don't know what they were firing at, but their fire was bursting right over our heads, and that was what got us was most concerned about. In fact, that was the most uneasy that I felt in the way of being actually being afraid, you know. And we ran up to a mess hall that was being built, and they had the concrete footings poured, and they had it framed up and a roof over it, but no siding on it. And we we all ran up to it and jumped over inside it, and we laid down against the ground, laid down on the ground against the concrete foot, and well, I put my hands up over my head because it sounded like every round that went off above us was getting closer, and I didn't know. I was wondering if it's ever going to hold that fire up, because it wasn't Japanese fire. It was fire coming from our own anti-aircraft gun somewhere. And finally, as things went quiet, and I laid there for a few seconds, and then I started raising up to look around. And there's a boy about, his face is about that far from mine, and he raised up too about the same time, and I looked at him, and I didn't say anything to him, and he didn't say anything to me, but I noticed his face is white as that paper over there, and I just wondered to myself if my face was as white as his. But that was the most uneasy moments I had during the attack that morning. And then it was about a week. It was about a week after that. That first group out of the 4th Defense started to Wake Island, and then 4 or 5 days later, after they left for Wake, is another group of us left. It was on the 19th, actually, 19th of December, when we left for Midway, and we landed on Midway on Christmas Eve morning, and I was kind of glad to get there, even if it was just a little piece of sand and rock or coral. It looked pretty good to me when we got inside of Midway that morning, and I was glad to get my feet on dry ground, on dry land there once again, even if it was just a small island like we did land on. And that flag looked pretty good. I felt pretty good about getting my feet on the ground again. But I don't think I took anything off but my shoes on those 4 or 5 nights we were on the water on the way to Midway. But I spent 15 months altogether. And finally, after we got there, but it's about 6 months later, when the Battle of Midway was on June the 4th, 42, when they attacked us, and I felt a whole lot better than on the night of June the 4th than I did on the night before. On the 3rd, that's when the patrol planes off of Midway sighted the Japanese, the carriers, and we knew what we were going to be in for the next morning. I didn't rest too well on the night of the 3rd in the morning, and then I felt better the evening of the 4th, actually, when it was all over for us. But the Japanese didn't surprise us on Midway like they did at Pearl Harbor. We knew for a month or more, I guess, that they were coming, and we began to get a lot of supplies and reinforcements, and Admiral Nimitz even came out to Midway there and talked to Colonel Shannon there one afternoon when we went over to the mess tent to eat. I saw them. They were standing out there talking, and I got a good look at Admiral Nimitz, and Jimmy Roosevelt came out there with that group of raiders that he was with it, and at that time, and Secretary of the Navy came out there, and I don't know who, Jimmy Roosevelt.
Mm-hmm.
He came out there. They brought him over to our radar position and showed him how we had it all set up. Had the antenna camouflaged, and it was a frame built up over it. We had that camouflage netting over it, and the radar that I was on, it was we didn't run around the clock continuously like the main the main radar on the island was operated by the Navy, but ours was just the backup for the Navy radar, and if they had to shut down for any reason, to have maybe maintenance or maybe have trouble with it, we'd have to go into operation, or if maybe they'd pick up a cartridge that they weren't sure of what it was. They might want us to go into operation too to see if we could get the same target. But sometimes I think it wasn't maybe nothing but water breaking over the coral reef out around the island. And
So what were you looking for? You were looking for ships?
looking for the
radar.
Ships. The ships. It was actually aircraft warning is what the radar was for. But sometimes if they be targets in close, it could be a ship. But most of the time it was for the aircraft warning is actually what the radars were designed for. It was the only difference in the radars that Navy had in ours actually was the height of the antenna.
Mm-hmm.
The Navy radar was on a tower. It was 200 or 250 feet high, but ours just on a trailer. Actually, we had a winch we could raise and lower it, and then the control van. It was in a van, the control van, and another power supply, a generator was on another. It wasn't in a. It was in a. Just on a trailer too. There were the three units there was all right close together, and that was the only difference in our radar and the Navy radar. But the Navy radar, it picked up the Jap planes coming into the island about 6 o'clock that morning, and then there was the airplanes that were taking off actually at the same time the radar, as soon as the radar picked them up. And the Midway is actually 2 islands, and all the aviation was over on it was the smaller island, was Eastern Island. That was where all the aviation was at the time I was out there. I was on the larger island, it was Sand Island. But all the off-duty watchstanders for that were in the headquarters and service battery, battalion H&S battery, if they had that condition 1, off-duty watchstanders, we had 4 machine guns that the H&S manned. The off-duty watchstanders would man in case of condition 1, and there were 3 of us off the radar had a machine gun, and we, as a 50 caliber machine gun, they were actually air cooled, and they were aircraft guns, but the motor transport people had mounted them on a mount that they could rotate, from, and it was just the H&S battery had 4 of them that they manned, and that's where I was on the morning of the attack. There were 3 of us off the radar that had our duty was to man our machine gun in case of an attack.
Mm-hmm.
And each battery was connected to the battalion CP with what they call the jig line, and we had to stand watches all around for 24 hours around the clock. And the man on watch that morning after condition 1 was set, he ran down in our troop shelter. We had underground troop shelters that we lived in, and told us that the condition 1 had been set. The planes, Jap planes, were picked up 95 miles out, and we ran down to our machine gun, and we just watched the planes taking off on Eastern Island, and just waited for the Jap planes to come in, and it wasn't too long before the planes approached the island, and we could see off in the distance that every now and then the plane would start falling with the smoke trailing. He was falling, and to see a splash out on the water. When we didn't know whether it was the Jap planes or airplanes, but I guess most of them actually were airplanes. We didn't have the planes as maneuverable as those Zeros.
Oh yeah.
And actually some of ours were obsolete, and we lost a lot of them too. But when the Jap planes came on towards the island, I think there were three V formations, and they were flying at about, they said they were about, I think, 11,000 feet, and they got close to the island, and all the anti-aircraft guns started opened up on them and started firing, and there was 3 of those 3 V formations that came in one right after the other. And that anti-aircraft fire all up around them. You see the burst of fire, burst of the shells when they hadn't hit anything, but just before they got in range there to drop their bombs, that plane in the nose of that first V formation, he got hit, and it began to burn, and I saw something fall from it, and I looked, I thought the pilot must have bailed out, and looked a little closer, got a better look at it, and nothing happened. Then the parachute opened. It was a big, long silver bomb. That's what it was. And then just a little bit later on, all the planes began to get right over the island, and every one of them seemed to drop a bomb at the same time. And you could see them coming down. And when they began to hit, they just ringed the island, that part of the island there that it was the most. That's where all the main buildings were on. And the seaplane hangar was hit, and the power plant was hit, and there was some fuel above ground, 3 big fuel tanks. They hit those, and then on around the Marine barracks were between the 3 anti-aircraft battery down on the beach behind the Marine barracks. They hit it, and those fuel tanks were the ones that I was closest to. I saw 2 bombs right. They was the closest ones that were to our machine gun position, and they hit those tanks, and there's a big orange flash of fire when those bombs went off, and they began to burn. And there's a black smoke almost engulfed the island there when they hit those fuel tanks, and they started burning. And it just almost make you kind of nauseated there with all the smoke and cordite from the bombs and from all that, all the guns on the island firing. In fact, the each defense battalion had 3 batteries of 3-inch guns. There were 4 guns in a battery, and the 3rd defense, it was at Pearl Harbor on December the 7th. But before the Battle of Midway, they sent the 3-inch anti-aircraft batteries of the 3rd Defense back out to Midway. But Midway, the 3rd Defense was the 1st Defense Battalion on Midway, and the 6th had relieved them back in the late summer or early fall before December the 7th. They'd sent all the 3rd Defense anti-aircraft batteries back out to Midway too. So we had 6 3-inch batteries, and the 4 guns to each battery. Now with all 24 of them were firing all during the attack. But then after the Japs all dropped their bombs, those Zeros came in and started strafing, and the one that came the closest to us, he was flying past out in front of us, and we didn't get much of it, just a few seconds to look at him and get a good look at him, but the tip of his left wing had been hit, and it was just trailing. It hadn't dropped off, but his plane was flying at an angle like that, because he couldn't fly. He couldn't keep it flying on a level keel. And I got a good look at him, the pilot, and see there was tracers coming too. They were right out of the nose of the plane, and he wasn't too far from us. But he was dressed up had a helmet on and goggles and gloves, white gloves. He had a white shirt on, a black tie, and he was sitting in there with those tracers coming right past us, and all the machine guns there on the center part of the island where we were opened up on him, and he was shot down. That was the one the plane that was the closest, and where we could get the best view of him. But he was dressed up that morning, and when the plane went down further on over on the part of the island where the Pan Am Hotel was, and some trees over there around it. That's where he went down. And after the battles, they dragged pieces of the plane up over to the H&S battery, and everybody got a little souvenir of
yeah?
Yeah, a little piece of the plane. I got one at home. I don't have it now. My son has it up in Louisville, but I still got a piece of that plane that was shot down. And the planes, after they left the island, they went back to the carriers, and they were refueling and rearming. They were coming back for a second attack on Midway, but they didn't get back because they landed and they were refueling and rearming, and that's when the Navy, the dive bombers off the carriers, up to our carriers. We didn't have a 3 out there. We had the Yorktown and the Enterprise and the Yorktown Enterprise and the Hornet. They was only the 3 we had. But that's when they caught those Jap carriers there when they had everything, the fuel lines, refueling the planes and rearming them. They got those Jap planes just right, those Jap carriers just at the right time, and they hit 4 of them there just in a matter of minutes, and that was what turned everything around on that Midway. They say that was actually the beginning of the end for because the Japs never did have any more carriers left to run over anybody else like it had been doing for the first 6 months of the war. And they said that at that particular time, they said it was about 19 minutes after 10, said Japan was stood at the height of its military might. Said that within 5 minutes later, they had lost 4 carriers that they used in the attack on Pearl Harbor. And then, about 2 months later, in August, about 2 months later, the First Defense Battalion, the First Navy, First Division of the Marine Corps made the landing zone on Guadalcanal, and then with the losses that they had at Midway, and the losses that they suffered there on Guadalcanal, those 2 events I think were the two main things that really slowed Japan down, and
Well, have company. Are you all?
neither one of them won the war
Mm-hmm.
for Japan, but they every time from then on, we were making the landings on and getting closer to Japan, and he was just drawing that noose tighter around them from those two events on to the end.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, after they came over Midway and then they left, what was it like cleaning up?
what was the what?
What was it like taking aftermath? Like, what did you do afterwards?
After that,
Yeah.
well, you mean for the rest of the time?
Yeah.
We didn't do anything. We just we were just there in case they came back.
Mm-hmm.
Those defense battalions actually were started formed in 1939, and they were all on the islands there for a long time before the war ever started. They well, the first 6 months of the war, and, the only contact with the Japanese as far as the Marine Corps is concerned was involved the defense battalions and the Marines that were on the seagoing Marines on the battleships and the cruisers.
Mm-hmm.
The Marine Corps had 2 divisions at the time the war started, but they didn't see action until it made the landings until after the landings were made on Guadalcanal.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Well, what did you do after Midway?
after Midway?
Yeah.
I went back to the States in April 1943,
Mm-hmm.
and I was based down at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina for the 2 years. I was with in the base artillery battalion and the artillery in the communications section of the H&S headquarters and service battery. We set up all the radio and telephone communications for those classes that were going through the artillery schools for the 155s and the 90 millimeters and 40s and the 20s. And when those classes would do their live firing, it was at on Onslow Beach, and we would take care of all the communications for the classes that were going through on the artillery school. At the artillery schools, we'd go out there on Onslow Beach and I was a radio operator myself, and I worked there on the firing line or right behind the firing line when the guns would be firing at the anti-aircraft. The guns would be firing at planes that would be towing a sleeve for them to fire on, and or go out on a boat. It was with the 155s firing. I'd either be on the beach on the radio, or in the case of the 155s, sometimes I'd be on a boat. So we'd have communications with the commanding officer that was in charge of the firing line. We'd have to pass or relay information from the boat to the beach, or from the beach to the boat or a plane, whichever the case may be. That's what I spent 2 years doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when I had extended for 2 years. But I thought they were fighting on Okinawa at the time. At that time, and when I went back over the West, I was sent back in about 6 months after I'd extended. And when I went back over there the second time, I was in the same kind of an outfit that we'd go over to an island, Kawalawi was the name of it, over near Maui. And the Navy had a naval gun firing range over there. And we'd go over there, and then we were on the island. They'd send destroyers over there from Pearl Harbor to practice naval gunfire. We'd have to get in contact, radio contact with them, and designate targets for them to fire on, and we'd spot for them. And then when we get them on close enough that to come to fire on the target, that would tell them to fire for effect, and that's what we were doing there at the time I went back the second time. And then of course the war ended, and sometime that's in October, or I think it was, September. It's when the war ended, and it wasn't very long for the people with enough points started going home. But I'd already had my 2 years to do, so I didn't go anywhere right at that time. But shortly after the first of the year in 1946, they sent me out to Guam, and I did the same. We did the same thing out on Guam that we were doing at Pearl Harbor on Kawalawi. We built a naval gun firing range on an island about 300 miles north of Guam. It was still one of the Mariana Islands. It was Pagan Island, and at the time of the war ended, they took the natives off of Pagan, and I guess it took them to Saipan or Tinian, I think, is where they went to. But the island didn't have anybody on it when we went up there and built that naval gun firing range. And it was an island. It wasn't too far from Iwo Jima. It had that black sand just like Iwo Jima. It had a volcano on it. We could see wisps of smoke at times come rising up out of that volcano. But it never was attacked. There never wasn't many landings made on it. But after those B-29s began to fly non-stop from Guam and Saipan and Tinian, they were flying to Japan, and that was when they made the landings on Iwo Jima during that time. And those planes that were flying flying to Japan, if they would have to turn around before they reached that certain point they call the point of no return. If they reached it before they reached that, had to turn back before they reached that certain point, they'd fly back over. They'd fly back over Pagan and drop their bombs, and they had it neutralized with. They never made a landing on it, but well, the Navy carriers bombed it some at times too, because we found the wreckage of one of our planes on Pagan that was shot down over it, and we had to get all the serial numbers off any parts of that plane that we could find, and radio back to. We had to send all that information back to Guam, but the island itself never was. There was any fighting on the ground on it. All of the damage that was done on Pagan was done by the planes that bombed it. But
Well, what happened after you got out of the military? When did you finally get released?
Well, when I got out of the military, I went to school up in Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
Went for about 2 years. When I went to a school up there. It was a technical school. I went to United Television Laboratories and took courses in electronics and the radio school, radio and television, and I worked at a radio station in Glasgow for about 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
I got a pass the FCC test at a radio, first class radio, telephone, radio and telephone, first class license. That's what at that time, all broadcast stations had to have a first class operator on transmitter watches. We had to log all the readings every 30 minutes and had to do the maintenance and installation. That's what I worked at after I got out. That's what I did while I was in the service. I was radio operator and television. I worked after the war was over, the battles over on Midway. They got short of operators, and they wanted to borrow a Marine. I'm choked up here. They wanted to borrow their operator off the Marine radar till they got replacements themselves, and they sent me over there to work on the Navy radar. And the same radar that picked up the Jap planes.
Mm-hmm. Now, when did you get married?
When did I get married? After I came to Louisville.
Uh-huh. And did you have children?
Yeah, I've got 3.
3 children?
Yes, I got a boy and 2 girls.
Uh-huh.
My wife's dead now, though. She died in 1997.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I got a boy. My boy lives in Louisville, and 1 daughter in Glasgow, and 1 daughter down in Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
One that lives in Nashville. She went to school here at Western.
Mm-hmm. And you have some grandchildren also, and great-grandchildren?
I got the boy has 4, and I got 5.
Mm-hmm.
And I got, I think, 7 great-grandchildren.
Mm-hmm. And now, what do you usually do now? What do you do now daily? What?
I don't do anything.
No.
No. I quit work in 1990.
Yeah, but didn't you just recently have a celebration?
No. When I quit.
No, I mean recently.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's all I've been doing here lately.
Yeah.
And when I had my 90th birthday, they gave me another big surprise too. They had a big birthday party then.
Yeah.
And I've had 2 or 3 other surprises here lately too.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm supposed to be in a parade at 2 parades in Glasgow and Cave City.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
Are you going to be the honored guest?
supposed to be. Supposed to be in Glasgow December the 7th.
Mm-hmm.
In that parade. And no, I'm not going to be the. What do they call them? The one that's. I think it's the last one in the last part of the parade.
Yeah.
Grand Marshal.
Grand Marshal.
No, I'm not going to be it. I'm supposed to be in Cave City, I think. That'd be on the 14th. And it was
Well, I want to thank you for doing this. I mean, I really appreciate your time you did, your service, and everything you did for our country.
well, I don't know. All this is something that it's a little unusual for me. I'm not planned. I'm not used to being, having do things like they've been doing here lately.
Uh-huh. Well, I want to thank you again, and I appreciate your service. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.